The whole war on drugs thing in America is like a really big deal. There's this guy, Dexter Lee Williams, who's basically a drug kingpin, and he's making things even worse. He was doing the same kind of stuff as those famous guys El Chapo and Pablo Escobar. You know, running this huge drug operation in Atlanta, Georgia for 5 years. The cops worked super hard to catch him. They did all this sneaky stuff like listening in on his phone calls and recording them. And they arrested a bunch of people. They followed the trail of drugs like cocaine, heroin, weed, and meth. And it all pointed to this guy, Dexter Lee Williams. He'd been in trouble before for selling cocaine and weed, but he decided he wanted to be a big shot instead of a small-time dealer. But then he messed up big time. In March 2020, the cops caught him with a massive shipment of cocaine, like 87 pounds of the stuff worth almost $4 million. That was way different from his usual small-scale stuff. So, you know, things went downhill for him. He ended up in court facing some serious time, up to 60 years in jail.
Mr. Williams, you're convicted not because I'm corrupt or underhanded or law enforcement is racist.
The judge talked to him about how messed up drugs are and how dangerous he was to the community. Williams just stood there and listened, even though his lawyer tried to fight the accusations.
I don't even know what other accusations. He didn't testify, so you're telling me what I said.
He didn't say a word in his defense. In the end, they decided to put him away for 40 years. Anyway, do you remember that guy Wallace Bigger, right? He's stuck behind bars now. The judge gave Mr. Williams a 20-year sentence on top of the other stuff he's in trouble for. The judge was pretty clear. I'm going to give you 20 years, and it's going to add up with the other charges you've got. He's got to serve it all. Getting sentenced for drugs is seriously no joke. That's probably why you shouldn't mess around with a judge, like some people seem to think. Wallace Bigger didn't hold back in court, even though he doesn't seem like the friendliest person around. He had some stuff to say after getting caught up in drug stuff.
I did not get a fair trial, and I got a screwy lawyer.
And get this, Lord Bigga, yeah, that's what they call him, didn't seem too happy with how his trial went down. Despite being in trouble for running a whole drug operation in Michigan and selling all sorts of pills like morphine and Dilaudid, he acted like it was no big deal. Even though he was making lots of money off his messed up drug business, the judge didn't have any nice words for him.
People think you're harmless until they get to know you a little better and realize you have a temper, you're a little mean-spirited, and you don't appear to have a kind bone in your body.
Turns out even his drug business was kinda lame. They were doing their thing out of trailers, campers, and even an apartment above a pizza place. Hope that pizza wasn't laced with anything weird. Anyway, when they were in court, Bigger was like, nah, I didn't do any of that. But guess what? One of his dealers, this guy Jason Blackmore, actually said he did.
Was the primary provider of morphine during that time period.
He was the main guy bringing morphine into Andrew County during that time. He kept going back and forth to Saginaw and getting like 800 pills every month and then selling them here. The headlines and the way the sentences stack up are going to send a message to anyone thinking they can step into that role. It doesn't matter how old you are, if you get caught selling a bunch of drugs, there are going to be consequences. You wouldn't really expect a nice old grandpa to be involved in drugs, right? But this guy, Vega, even though he's 71, was pretty mean. He went off on his lawyer, the judge, and the whole justice system. And that made the judge get a bit emotional with him, saying stuff like, "You didn't stop yourself from hurting others. Your wife even talked about how she was high when she married you." Which I'm not surprised about. I don't get what draws you two together. But honestly, you can't really imagine a drug dealer being all sweet and nice, especially not when they're caught. Despite all this complaining, this guy Vega got slapped with a 15-year prison sentence.
Sentencing you to 180 to 360 months on charge number 1. On charge 2, the controlled substance delivery charge, 23 to 240 months.
That's the longest anyone in Antrim County has ever gotten for drug-related crimes. The judge laid out the charges and the time he's looking at. For the most serious drug delivery charge, it's like 23 to 240 months. Then for this third and fourth marriages, it's the same range. And for keeping a drug house, it's like 16 to 24 months. And when it comes to running a criminal operation, it's like 50 to 240 months. On the other side of things, there are some criminals who just own up to what they did right away, like this guy Benjamin Bundy. not related to the famous serial killer Ted Bundy, even though their last name seems to have a connection to crime. This Bundy guy was a mess in court, crying his eyes out when he realized he was responsible for 2 people's deaths, including his own girlfriend. He was dealing drugs in New Hampshire and things got really messed up. He started mixing his drugs with this super addictive substance called fentanyl, and as if that wasn't bad enough, this crazy mixture led to 2 people overdosing and dying, Matthew Nichols and his girlfriend Jennifer Azera. When it came to Bundy, he didn't waste any time in court. He accepted a deal and admitted to everything.
I would submit that this case really is, in fact, a dismal testament to where all of this ultimately leads.
But the most intense part of the whole thing was when the families of the victims got up to talk. One of the victims' loved ones said, "The life that Matt gave to me is gone. Time doesn't change that. I miss her so much. Just as much now as I did when she died." During all this, Bundy stayed quiet and composed. But even a tough guy who dealt drugs couldn't hold it together when he saw grieving parents. He ended up breaking down in tears. They told him, "You're getting 15 years. That's a chance to make things right. I hope you make the most of it." In the end, they sentenced Bundy to 15 years in prison, and Azera's dad thinks maybe he can turn his life around after that. It seems like mixing heroin with fentanyl is the latest messed up trend in the world of drugs. Another guy, Aaron Andrade, got caught up in it too. But his story is heartbreaking. He was in court because a woman named Kristen Coutu, who had struggled with addiction before, died because of what he sold her.
The state would have proven that what the defendant really sold Kristen Coutu was nearly pure fentanyl.
Coutu was actually doing well in rehab, but she went back to heroin when she got involved with another person who used drugs. And that's how she ended up crossing paths with Andrade. Sadly, Kristen overdosed and died because it turns out the stuff Andrade sold her wasn't just heroin, it was the much stronger and more addictive fentanyl. Andrade was in court because of a second-degree murder, but his punishment wasn't just a potential life sentence, it was also having to face the heartbreak of Coutu's mom and family as they struggled to hold it together in court. Coutu's mom said,
"There were 2 Cranston police officers standing there. All I could say repeatedly was, 'Please don't tell me my daughter is dead. Please don't tell me my daughter is dead.'"
Andrade actually seemed to feel guilty and sorry for what he did.
I know I hurt a lot of people, including her family and mine, because we're all going through this.
Even Coutu's mom found a bit of comfort in that, saying,
It does make me feel a little bit better that he has that remorse and that he feels sorry for what he did.
But feeling guilty wasn't going to change the fact that a daughter is gone. And as a result, Andrade got a 40-year prison sentence. While some drug dealers are only in it to make a quick buck, some are downright maniacal, like Charles Krusty aka Rome. The man behind this horrifyingly blank stare in court was arrested on 11 drug charges, but his rap sheet went way back. After a series of overdose-related deaths in New Richmond, leads and cases all led back to Krusty, who sold heroin, fentanyl, and cocaine. Krusty is like something out of a supervillain comic book story. However, this real-life kingpin forced addicts to sell his drugs by beating them. During the investigation, many of them pointed to their merciless boss, or his street name, Rome. The one straw that broke the camel's back was an informant who bought drugs from Rome. The trial was pretty short and sweet since Krusty couldn't have been caught more red-handed.
Individuals like Charles Krusty provide the weapon, they provide the bullet, and they spin the chamber, pointing at the addict's head, and all the addict has to do is pull the trigger.
But the way Krusty was completely silent, giving everyone a death stare, was very eerie. During the court session, the police chief explained how he found Rome's dealers all messed up from getting beaten up. He mentioned, kind of sympathetically,
have black eyes or their face would be swollen. And I would ask them, how did this occur? And they would frankly tell me that Rome, Charles Krusty, and his associates would beat them.
But when the uncomfortable hearing wrapped up, Krusty got sentenced to 20 years and 9 months behind bars. The chief summed it up by saying,
"Every day that he's locked up is one day that New Richmond, Clermont County is a little bit safer."
So you gotta wonder, was the nickname Rome because he wanted to rule, or was it more about his big fall from grace?